Site. Phone lines are open. Dial 384-2191.
Well, into the second Friday of the month, and this time it's the month of August, and on the second Friday of the month, we get a visit from the police. A friendly visit, nonetheless, for you to take advantage of and ask them questions about the business of the city here. From Marshfield PD is Interim Chief Pat Zepps and Lieutenant Travis Hesser. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jeff.
So this time of the year, I guess we're still in summer, still active yet. I mean, I don't know if in wintertime you get less calls. I don't know if being cooped up inside, they just seem to shift from traffic to domestic to different types of calls.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's different types of calls depending on the season. Traffic, I think, is a little more prevalent in the summer. Other than that, always there's that learning curve here, and we won't even talk about when snow and ice comes for people to get used to driving in that again. But, yeah, different types of calls, I think, for the most part.
I'm noticing traffic beginning to return. The car counts, again, seem to be up. Not to pre-pandemic levels, but for a while it was pretty barren on the streets, and now I'm seeing a lot more people out again.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much back to normal for the most part for traffic in the city. So we're seeing that road construction is going on too, so that's causing more traffic in certain areas. But to me, it looks like it's back to pre-pandemic levels pretty much during the daytime.
I look in my rearview mirror and I'm like, holy smokes, there are cars lined up behind me here. So,
No red lights, though, behind you. That's why we watch them.
Not recently. So this time of the year, we're getting into now school zones and things like that, crossing guards. Who hires those? Is that part of your jurisdiction, or is that under the school district?
Crossing guards do fall under the police department, so we hire them, and that comes out of our budget. So, yep, we take care of the crossing guards.
Is that annual training, or is there anything you need to do with them? Or
Sure. There's they have monthly meetings in which they cover anything that's relevant. There's a training period when you first come on, and then they're deciding where where they're going to station you. So our staff services supervisor, Lori Crookstrom, takes care of that program for us, does an excellent job.
Is there much turnover?
I would say generally not. We're always looking for subs. People get ill or something or can't make it. So, but generally, I wouldn't say there's a lot of turnover. It's a pretty consistent group that does a really good job for us.
So, if you have the time and you're willing to stand outdoors for a few, what does it take? Hours? 2?
Yeah, I would say they're out there for probably an hour and a half in the morning, maybe an hour and a half in the afternoon.
Yeah,
something like that. Huh?
Yeah.
How many do you have? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know how many we have total.
Yeah, because some of them are subs for us, like Pat said, because not everybody can make it every single day. So if I had to guess, I would say about 15-ish, somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
And you talked about monthly, but it's not a year-round job.
No, we don't use them in the summer at all.
Okay.
So, or breaks, anything like that. It's actually kind of a nice part-time job because, when the holidays are in, you're not working. You're not working nights, weekends, or during the summer. So
auxiliary is year-round, though.
Auxiliary is year-round. Yep, they're our volunteer group.
How are they doing?
Oh, they're doing good, I think.
Yeah.
Their numbers ebb and flow as life changes and people come and go. But we are always looking for citizens who are interested in getting involved in the community and helping the police department. So that we really don't take there's no limit on the number of auxiliary members we'll take. So that's always something we put a plug in for, always looking for that. They're a great resource for those who don't know a lot about them. They really supplement our eyes and ears, do a lot of traffic direction for us. See them at a lot of special events like the fair, Hub City Days, parades, things like that.
Just extra eyes in case somebody needs help. They
Sure.
have radios that can get to people.
Yep, they have radios. They get some training in some different areas. They'll go out on patrols in pairs. We'll give them a squad car, and they'll go be an extra set of eyes for a couple hours as they're available. So
we haven't had too many shutdowns. I mean, like serious accidents or, where you had to work a big fire for a while there where you don't have to pull an officer necessarily off the road, but you can get some people out there and then still run traffic for a while.
Right. Yeah, they're a great resource for us, too, as far as missing persons. If we have a missing child or anybody else missing, they're great. They come out, they'll cruise the streets, give us an extra set of eyes, and they've been fairly successful in finding some of those people. So, again, really good group of people.
I thought I saw a post about somebody recently being found. I'm going to try to find it here. But that's one of those things, too, that we're getting on our phones now, these alerts, amber and silver alerts. That normally went just to you guys, but now with the cell phones, I think they're putting it out all over.
Yeah, it is. We had a young child go missing out of Rapids. Was that last week, I think? And then ended up with a good resolution. That person was found. So, yeah, that goes over every cell phone. I got 2 kids who have cell phones, and they get the same thing. So, yeah, they're hitting pretty much everybody with that.
That's a good thing, I think.
It is.
I mean, to get eyes out there and know when things are going on.
My understanding was the number of tips that came in to the Wood County Dispatch Center was pretty intense based off of that Amber Alert, so that's excellent.
And it wound up okay, as I recall.
It did.
It was resolved without any problems. You know, and so many times, I don't know how to state this, but when I look at your reports on the Daily Blotter, a lot of domestic stuff.
Yeah.
Mom took the kid, Dad took the kid when they weren't authorized to take the kids.
Sure.
You know, just mainly somebody's got a mad on against somebody else and doesn't feel, justice is being done, so they take it into their own hands and violate orders or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of refereeing on your part is what I see. It seems like, because, don't come around them. That's the way the report usually ends. They were told to stay apart. Well,
it is, and there's often time set in those court agreements. For instance, one parent might have the child for one weekend, and then the next weekend he's with the other parent. And if those court orders are violated, that really is, it's one of the tougher things for us to enforce. We do enforce it, but ultimately the family court has so much jurisdiction over that barring somebody taking a child and leaving with it, we generally refer them back to the family courts, and that's been more successful for us. It's very hard for us to physically remove a child from an environment, barring some sort of danger. But in these circumstances, like with the Amber Alert, you're looking at somebody who didn't have any rights to have the child, whether it's a parent or not. And that's my understanding of what this last Amber Alert was the child was taken by a parent who didn't have parental rights at that time. So in essence, that becomes a kidnapping.
It can start out simple, though. I mean, say, for instance, the court-ordered custody is every other weekend. Well, every other weekend doesn't line up with a family reunion in August.
Yeah.
And so can we switch? And they want to be nasty, and they say no, and before you know it, somebody goes ahead and does something, and they're in technically violation, but can't you just work it out? Sometimes you want to say to 2 people, right? Are you really got to be that petty?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are working it out, but those aren't the people that we hear from. So
right.
Like you're saying, and most of the time it does start with some special event, and then there's not tolerance on the other end by the other parent to say, hey, I'm willing to switch my weekend to allow you to take the child to this event or that event, and then things have a tendency to go awry sometimes.
Yeah, and I see so much of that in your reports, those kind of things, whether there's it doesn't even have to be an age. It can be anywhere from teens and 20s all the way up to 50s and 60s, where people, males and females, are in a loud argument, and the neighbor calls and says, this could escalate into something, so before it does, can you come over here and separate the parties, so to speak?
Yeah, and I know we've touched on this before. We like those types of calls, because if we can get over there and calm it down, and that's all it is, hey, that's a good day for everybody involved before it escalates. So I've been a big proponent to tell the community, hey, by all means, if something doesn't look right or something looks like it's escalating, you are not by any means putting us out if you call us, so please do, because a big part of our job is to get over there and mediate things. And if we can mediate things and get some people separated and get it calmed down before it comes to the point where somebody has to get arrested, again, I think that's a better day for everybody.
Well, when you leave, you say, now, don't go around each other, but that's not a court-ordered thing, but it is on record.
It is, and we can suggest that. For instance, if we go to a domestic abuse situation and determine that we don't have a crime or an arrest, but yet it wasn't something that was elevated, we can suggest that you separate. But I can't force you to separate. I can't say, you leave the house and go stay somewhere else. I can strongly encourage you to do that, because I can tell you I don't think it's going to be good if we leave with what I'm looking at here. So for your good and the good of your partner, it's probably best if one of you leave, but ultimately that's a decision they're going to have to make.
And the problem is, though, because you don't have the ability to demand it, you may come back.
Correct.
And then the second time is like you're a little less tolerant of what's going on here, and hopefully dispatch will tell you, well, this isn't the first time, or you don't have to put the cuffs on somebody before you realize it isn't the first time, or maybe you just sit them down for a while. I don't know. I mean, it's just it's you don't want to be overly protective. I don't know if that's the right word. The long arm of the law here. But on the other hand, coming back here again, it's like I told you once. You know.
Well, and then those particular cases with domestics, that's one of the few areas where the state mandates that we make an arrest if it meets certain criteria. So a lot of times when you speak about being overly protective or whatever, sometimes we don't have that choice when we go to those. If those parameters and conditions are met, we're mandated to make that arrest sometimes. So, and if we're getting called back there a second time, generally it's not because things have gotten better. They've usually gotten worse and escalated, and then therefore they might then meet that criteria that second time around. And if the advice wasn't heeded the first time, to separate, then sometimes we do go back the second time, and an arrest unfortunately ends up having to take place.
Talking with Marshfield PD, Travis Esser, Pat Zepps, you can too, 384-2192. Pointing out to you as you're listening here, a lot of their work, I don't know if I'd say majority, but a good share of it is these types of incidents. And when you say it's mandated, that at some point you say, gee, I wish they'd give me the autonomy to do what I need to do. And then there's other times when you go, well, okay, now I've got a reason here. I don't have to say it was me. I'm being the mean guy here. I can, lean on the law and say, look, it says here, you got to go with me. We'll put the cuffs on and go for a ride. But other than that, sometimes the law helps, sometimes it hurts. It depends upon how the situation is.
Right. And I think with these domestic abuse laws, they go back quite a ways. And I do think that they've helped us. One of the harder things, I think, for a police officer is when you lose some amount of discretion. But in this case, domestic abuse is such a problem. And victimization is such a problem, and it's really, really hard sometimes to get a victim to come forward, that when we're there and there's those mandates in place, it really does start the process moving, whereas without these type of mandates, it may not. And I'm a big believer that this, in the end, has saved some lives. As inconvenient as it is for people, they don't like it, but it puts the onus on them to tell you, look, if you meet this criteria, you're going to get arrested, you're going to go before a judge, because we're not going to let this escalate. So, and it really is about protecting the victims.
How much training do you do? Sit down with guys in the department or gals and say, this is what it is. I mean, they need to know this, because when you're on scene, it's high elevated, tempers and emotions at the time, and knowing what you need to do and what you're allowed to do or mandated to do has to be like muscle memory,
Yeah, and I was actually going to say that. I mean, like you said earlier, we handle enough of them that we don't necessarily need ongoing training for the purposes of helping the officers decide whether or not it meets that criteria, because most of them pretty much have that ingrained in their mind from repetition of having dealt with those types of situations quite frequently. But we do have ongoing training throughout the department, review of domestic abuse policy throughout the year, and sometimes we couple with I'm going to get the name wrong, the Personal Development Center. They have a new name, the Orenda Center. And sometimes some of their advocates come in and, we do some cross-training with things that they do for victimization portion of it, and we collaborate that way and do some interdepartmental training too.
Well, there's a name I forgot about, and that is that there are homes, and people in the area that can help with counseling, but what's mandated and what's suggested is, where the line sometimes determines whether this will be a one thing or we'll see you guys later again, and then we'll have to do something about this.
Right. Yeah, the mandate is really, it's specific. If, an individual creates a disturbance or something in their home that instigates fear in somebody, that's your base level disorderly conduct. With a domestic abuse enhancer, of course, those types of charges become more obvious if there's a physical injury or something to that extent. But it doesn't really take much to meet the level of a mandatory arrest in a domestic abuse situation. And I truly believe the reason for that is because you want to address it at that point. You don't want it to get to where there's a physical injury or we're looking at an abused victim or something like that physically. So I would say in my experience those laws have helped more than they haven't. There are people who don't agree with that and think, well, you guys should have the discretion. It's just an argument. But at the same time, it starts wheels in motion that provide other services. Because when we're there for a domestic violence incident or we make an arrest, services are provided to that victim on scene. Now, whether they decide to take them at that time or not, really it's up to them. But the goal is to provide them contact with an advocate who can help them that evening. So there's a lot of wheels that start to turn at that point that are well outside of an arrest, and it really does focus on the victim.
You glanced off something here that is, to me, the basis of law enforcement, and you said domestic or obstruction or a charge with a domestic enhancer. Once the officer has what he considers the criteria to make this, lawyers have to take over and follow up. Somebody has to, goes to a DA or somebody that has to be able to want to take that case and prosecute. Not everybody does. Most often they will. But just because you take somebody in doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to happen. We see that more on the high-profile cases. But small stuff like this, and I say small stuff, it's not if it's your life, but these kind of cases. But when a law enforcement officer finds probable cause or reason to take somebody in and be charging somebody, the charges have to be handed off to a lawyer, and that lawyer then has to determine whether or not he's going to prosecute.
Yeah, but in this particular instance with domestic abuse, like Pat had said, these are mandatory arrests, and it used to be that the violators could bond out and become released. And like 2 years ago, I think, is when they first changed it, especially in Wood County here. Every violator of a domestic abuse has to see a judge now. So I think we're still increasing the seriousness that's looked at from all angles, whether it is the district attorney's office, the judges, or whatever, as far as these violations go, and making sure that these people don't get released prior to seeing a judge, and that things are put in place. Advocates are being called for the victims, and safety measures are being taken so that this person just doesn't get released after posting $150, and then we're right back at the house again, like you mentioned earlier. So it's taken serious on all levels, I think.
And that's an interesting point that's brought up as far as when the charge gets to the district attorney's office. There's a lot of people in the community that may not understand that. What we do is we make an arrest off of that probable cause to believe an offense happened. At that time, we do a request for charges through the district attorney's office, and they ultimately are the decision maker on whether that case moves forward or not. So
I guess that's a little bridge between when the arrest happens and the court date happens that people don't realize. They think it's just now I got arrested, now I got to go to court. Not necessarily. There are other people in between who are looking at that. And as Travis mentioned here, though, that some of it is mandated.
Correct.
So it's not always just the officer and the DA coming into an agreement here. How often do you have contact with lawyers, DAs, DA assistants, attorneys, stuff like that? I mean, you're constantly, your job is, I guess, to a certain extent, take people in and then hand them off.
Yeah, I would start with that, and then I'll turn that over to Travis because he's in the investigative bureau, so that's even more. I would say a lot. And there is a lot of collaboration at times when we make an arrest and we're sifting through to make sure that we have the appropriate charge. Might involve a call to the district attorney or an assistant district attorney to say and talk through some of those things to make sure that we send the appropriate charge, because statutes, like everything else, I mean, there can be levels of interpretation. That's why some people get off in trials, some people plea bargain, some people end up guilty in trials. So, and that's why judges are so important in that realm. But I think and I'll turn that over to Travis, because when you start looking at detectives and the amount of follow-up in the cases they handle, I think there really is a lot of that collaboration on the side of the attorneys.
Yeah, not only for that reason, but also for charging purposes, but also for search warrants. Our detectives are writing a fair amount of search warrants, and those always get reviewed by the district attorney's office. So they're having phone calls or email correspondence back and forth, making sure that search warrants meet all the probable cause parameters within inside of those, to then be sent to a judge to review as to whether or not they're going to sign off on that particular thing. So like Pat said, there's a lot of back and forth between us and the district attorney's office that happens fairly frequently. Sometimes we just have some really unique sets of circumstances that cause us to call the DA and say, hey, what do you think about this one? Do you think it would meet the criteria for this statute or not? And just have those open discussions. And they've been great about taking any phone call at pretty much any time of the day.
And that's what I was thinking too. I mean, their job is, with the cell phone in their pocket, is constantly ringing. Could be dinner time, could be nighttime, could be any time.
Yep.
Is there an office of the DA in the annex?
No,
or do you have
not
to,
anymore.
Does everything have to go through Rapids now?
It's all Rapids now, yeah.
And an important differentiation there is, too, as far as municipal violations, we work with a city attorney. And he is just as valuable to us, and that same level of collaboration happens on the municipal level when it comes to citations. So.
And mostly you're asking him if, this is a case that can go forward, or how to file the charges, or what charges to file?
With that, it's a little bit hypothetically... that might be something where we write a citation and that goes to the city attorney, and there may be a pre-trial conference if an individual decides, no, I'm going to go and plead not guilty to this, I want to go before the municipal judge. That type of contact would be what they call a pre-trial conference to see, okay, where are we at, what might potentially be problematic if there is anything, to talk through some of those things so that there's answers to those in trial. So... I'm kind of getting technical here in the fact that as you're listening, you wonder how, there's a city attorney, there's a district attorney, county attorney for all intents and purposes, and how, when something gets filed, how it gets filed and what gets filed is more than just one person's arbitrary decision. And then how it goes through the courts is also, if you're a civil offense or in Marshfield, and the city attorney might not have to get involved if it goes right to a judge or if there's a plea out, Correct. An individual may just opt to pay that citation, and then the involvement literally ends with the officer and that individual. So,
civic question: do we have court in town?
Yes, we have municipal court
at the city hall.
Yep, correct. Council chambers.
Okay, how often does that happen?
Second and fourth Wednesday of the month.
Okay. So depending upon when, that determines how long you're going to wait for your... Or is it gathering of evidence? I don't have a civic... It's just not usually gathering of evidence. It's not that level.
Not usually for city stuff. I mean, sometimes there's the subpoenaing of expert witnesses and stuff like that when it gets to the point where it's going to go to a trial, and evidentiary things like blood test kits from OWIs or something like that, but otherwise not usually a ton of evidence for municipal hearings. It's all just the ordinance violation stuff there. So,
talking with Travis Esser, you're a detective. What's superfluous, silly, and not? I mean, if something gets stolen property, and they say, well, aren't you going to take any prints? He said, you watch too much TV. I mean, it's mailbox. I don't know. Are we? But people who are feeling violated are upset, and they want this prosecuted. They want the lawbreaker to be held accountable, whether it seems small to you because you deal with this every day. They're miffed.
Yeah, and we've tried to do our best to bridge that gap a little bit, because you mentioned TV, and that has, the crime scene shows that have taken place over the last decade or so has really, I think, caused a lot of people to think that we have things at our disposal that we don't necessarily have, or that we can get results from things that we collect within 45 minutes, and as we know, those things just aren't realistic. But we've tried to collect what we can on any given crime, even if it is what we would consider a lesser crime. Maybe it's a criminal damage to property or something, and something's damaged for less than $100. If there's a shoe print there or there's potential fingerprints there, we'll try to get them. Where we run into problems is if we need something like that examined by a professional at the crime lab. They're so inundated with things that we're restricted on what we can actually send them that they will actually look at and process for us. So we sometimes need to meet certain thresholds for them before we'll get the processing of that evidence to actually occur. And so sometimes that's just something that we have to explain to victims. I mean, we can collect a lot of that stuff. Whether or not we can do something with it is sometimes up for debate.
Talking with Marshfield PD, Pat Zepps, Travis Esser in here. You can join us, 384-2192, 384-2192 on this second Friday in the month of August.
I've got some cheese curds that I'm willing to share. Then I want to ride that giant slide over there. So if you've got 11 days to spare, won't you come with me to the Wisconsin State Fair? Won't you come with me to the Wisconsin, the great state of Wisconsin State
State Fair presented by U.S. Cellular, August 5th through the 15th.
A COVID-19 vaccine safely protects kids 12 and up and lets kids get back to being kids again. So don't wait. Visit vaccines.gov to get a COVID-19 vaccine appointment near you or call 211 to learn more.
Brought to you by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services.
Hi, I'm Patty LaBelle. Cooking is knowing when it's time. Time to add some salt, time to take it off the burner. And now it's time to get screened for cancer. Just go online for timetoscreen.org.
Brought to you by Cancer Care and the Community Oncology Alliance.
WDLB's Inside program for the second Friday in August, talking with members of Marshfield PD. Pat Zepps, Travis Esser in here to visit with us, and you too for that matter. 384-2192, 384-2192. If you have something that you'd be interested in understanding a little better about how this happens, I'm trying to take you through, I guess I'd say, the day in the Marshfield PD here. It's not necessarily always like TV shows. Thankfully, we don't have a lot of shootouts. We do have some pursuits, though, and they seem to be, in my mind anyway, happening a little more often. And there's generally more than one agency involved here now. Most recently, it was earlier this week. On your Facebook page today, they talked about the pursuit on Wednesday evening, Marshfield into rural Clark County. So it goes from one jurisdiction to another, hand it off, who's going to stay with it, who's going to pick it up? I mean, how do you make those decisions on the fly?
Yeah, we don't necessarily hand it off, but those other agencies will certainly come into it and assist. There are times when it has been handed off, but ultimately, as long as we're able to safely continue, we'll try to take that thing to the end. But the collaboration on that one was fantastic. I believe Clark County had some spike strips out and got some spike strips on them, which slowed them down enough for us to use that pursuit intervention technique that ultimately stopped it. So, knock on wood, we've been really, really fortunate with the outcome of these things, but you're right, they seem to be occurring more and more often.
I don't know. I guess they think you're driving pickup trucks.
we got a couple pickup trucks.
I know. I can outrun that. He figures. I don't know.
You don't know what we got under that thing, though, Jeff.
Yeah, but he's in a Subaru.
We might have souped that thing up.
You can't outrun a Motorola, though, Jeff. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's what they used to say in Mayberry too.
Yeah.
So, but that kind of, like say for instance, coming south out of Marathon County, out of Spencer. Now you got Spencer. You've got Marathon County sheriffs involved. You've got, and the car that's in the lead pursuit probably just stays there, and we'll see it to the finish then.
Yeah, I mean that I would say that's the typical result. One of the things that you got to be worried about is getting too many people in on these things. Then that becomes a bit counterproductive. So, it's set in our policy the different roles and number of officers that can be involved in these. But the last thing you really need is a train of 15 police cars behind somebody. Now, that being said, I will never say that there's not a situation where that wouldn't happen or be necessary, but generally we need to do it safely and we need to do our role and make sure everybody understands their role. So when Spencer comes in, they may decide to back off and let a Marshfield cop take the lead because they know the city better or something to that effect. So they're really kind of specific to the circumstances.
It generally, as a fleeing person, doesn't make sense to do the side roads, 2-lane roads, the city roads. They're usually on Veterans Parkway or they're on a main thoroughfare somewhere that they can know where they're going from one end to another without a whole lot of. They're going to blow through a stop sign or a traffic light anyway, but still, those areas seem to be the ones that they're on most often. And then there comes. Who charges? Do they file charges where the start of the pursuit went, where the end of it went? I mean, if you have someone who has a state warrant, it's statewide, so.
Yeah, it's usually the agency where the pursuit started will charge the felony fleeing offense. And you brought up an interesting point before. I mean, we're relatively close to quite a few jurisdictional lines here. So, I mean, if we don't have far to go and we're in Clark County or we're in Marathon County and primarily in Wood County. So there's a number of different directions we go, and we're going to end up having another agency involved a lot of times. Or, like you said, if somebody like Spencer starts one, they're fairly close to here, or Stratford, and we've had those things happen. I think where they go is a little bit dependent on the suspect too and what they're familiar with for the roadways, because we've had some people come up here from bigger cities on the east side of the state, and we end up getting in a pursuit with them, and they're going to stay on those big roads, sometimes stay on the interstates where they're somewhat familiar of, because this is not a familiar area for them. And then in other times we've had some where, if somebody's over in Clark County and they're super familiar with back country roads and ways that they can cut shortcuts, they'll take that way sometimes too. So it just depends on who the person is, I think, on where it ends up.
I don't know. Do you have many of the moonshiners anymore, type of drivers who are heading through and know where the back roads are?
I would be willing to bet there's plenty of them. I don't know if they're necessarily moving moonshine, but
No.
they're moving something. So they know. That's a little bit of the harder stuff now. This last individual, I think, was arrested for methamphetamine. And
yeah, it used to be that was, because of the ability to cook it up and the amount of odor and chemicals that were needed, they would do that in the woods.
Correct.
You had mobile labs even that were in vehicles, so that you didn't have that constant odor somewhere that would be suspicious for other neighbors or anything like that. So you have now, I call them the modern-day moonshiners, we're the meth cookers. But I don't find as much of that being stated in your reports anymore. I don't see as many local manufacturing. It's mostly brought into the area, from what I understand.
Yeah, you're correct on that. We haven't had a meth lab here in Marshfield. I don't think this year we've had one. We did last year, and it was just the one. So, and thankfully for that, because those are very dangerous, toxic environments, and we have to bring in quite a few special resources to take care of those situations. So we're thankful that they're not here, but that obviously doesn't mean we don't have a meth problem. It's coming from everywhere else into here, and so that's the primary portion that we've been dealing with in the more recent past.
That's the amazing part to me is how it moves, how people are able to do that. And it seems to me that they get nervous, as you might. You got a bale of marijuana in the trunk, you're probably you got your head on a swivel, you're watching everything, but yet they'll speed or they'll do something that, gets pulled over. And I've said this for years. I look at your reports of how many people are just happened into that have a warrant. That's outstanding warrants. And I'm like, this guy walking down the street, stop him. Yeah, he's got outstanding. Really? Just people, everybody just walks away, I guess. I don't know.
And I think the interesting point about that is I'm a big believer in the effectiveness of traffic enforcement. And when you look at really what traffic enforcement does is it provides a deterrent, and it also brings us across those things that we normally wouldn't encounter. For instance, we've had some relatively large drug arrests, some relatively serious warrant arrests in my time here, just off of random traffic stops. I mean, when you go back to, a lot of even the other agencies, I know one of the Olympic bombers, Rudolph, was caught off of a traffic stop. You look at the Oklahoma City bomber. So it's police officers out there being proactive, making stops that has a huge impact in taking people off the streets with warrants, drugs, dangerous things, weapons. So that's an important thing for the community to understand, is that there really is a twofold purpose for that. We want the roads to be safe. We want people to comply with the driving laws. We want to lower accidents, instances of OWI and all those things. But we also want to be proactive and be present in the community so that people know that we're out there and we're trying to do other things through traffic enforcement as well.
It's between domestic incidents and traffic enforcement, that's... I don't even want to put a percentage. You could put it on, what of the things that you do. It's mostly calls to people being mean or beating up on each other, domestic incidents, as we call them, in people's homes, or it's something in traffic. And what you just stated was you do that and you are active in traffic because of just like a magnet, just run it over and a few people stick,
Sure. For example, you might stop a car with a revoked driver. Your purpose in that isn't solely to give that revoked driver a citation. It's also to stop him from getting into an accident, because that's really problematic for someone who gets into an accident with someone without a license or insurance or things like that. So traffic enforcement really does serve, a number of purposes. Good purposes.
Talking with Pat Zepps, Travis Esser of Marshfield PD. You can too. 384-2192. 384-2192 here in the studios on the second Friday in August. Coming to you on Marshfield Media Access. We do video this. It will probably be on Channel 989. I don't tune in as often as I used to for whatever reason. I guess I was here the first time, so watching it the second time isn't as exciting as to what they're going to say.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet either. I don't...
It's like listening to your recording. Right? Like, oh, it's painful.
Well, because your voice never sounds the same to you as it does to everybody else.
Right.
So
Yeah, well, that ship sailed for me. It's 40 years ago because I'll be in the store somewhere and they'll have the radio on, and I realize that's me. And
well, my least favorite person to listen to, I think, is myself. So
yeah, I seem to know a lot in my head. But this time of year now, we're getting into August, fair time around the area. You'll be doing, I guess, some time out there adding to your work schedules, or putting down what guys that we want to be, not only auxiliary, but also some uniform people will be around, especially in the evenings.
Yeah, we put out some overtime. We'll have some extra presence down there. It's really worked out well. It's a great opportunity for us to interact with the community as well, too. I think that's one of the bigger benefits that comes out of that. It's not just to deter problems or things like that, but it's a great opportunity for officers to go down there and talk to people. I know it was one of the funner assignments I've done over the years, was pulling a shift down there and listening to the public. So it's a good thing, and we'll have them down there.
And there's no good nicks you can eyeball. See what they're doing. What are they up to?
Sure.
I'm hoping not as much of the drunk enforcement as there once was. I don't seem in today's society to have as much of that as when I was young. Maybe because of all these years of decades now of enforcement, and attitudes have changed quite a bit about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think years ago when we started, there was probably a little bit more of that than there is now. It seems less, or people are more responsible, and with the driving too, they get their driver ahead of time, and so we don't see as many OWIs and things like that coming out of there either. So just a change over the course of time, but a good change.
And there used to be a lot more scrapping and fights in my younger years too than there are now. People would get the beer muscles or whatever, and their inhibitions were gone, and I never liked that guy anyway. And next thing you know, the words are said and fisticuffs fly, and then you got 2 or 3 guys jumping in just for the fun of it, and now you got a Donnybrook going on out there, and that's never fun.
No, and I remember that too. You used to have, right around midnight when the beer tents would close, you'd have 6-8 officers kind of stand in the area, more or less as a deterrent because it was needed. And I absolutely agree with Travis. Doesn't nearly seem to be the case anymore. And we've tried to have a good presence down there because I don't think generally the community wants to see that, or that's good for the fair in anyways, and I know they don't want it there. But at the same time, people should be able to go down there and have whatever they want for dinner and a beer, and and not have to worry about getting into a big scrap like you said. So good for everybody all the way around, I think.
They give the younger generation, and it's traditional, the younger generation a hard time because they're not what we were, and that's okay. Actually, in this case, they're actually a little better.
Right.
So that's one thing that we don't have much anymore. Resurgence of the Delta variant in the area. Would imagine that you are taking precautions as well, or what's your thoughts on going to an incident where the person could be infected?
Our dispatchers are still doing a pretty good job of screening that on those incoming calls and trying to figure out if there's a person in that household that we're heading to, or that the fire department or ambulance crew are heading to, that is currently positive or having symptoms of COVID, so that we can do whatever we can to provide those protective measures for our responders. So we'll continue to do that, I think, and so far within the department, not masking up quite yet, but it's a possibility if people are having some symptoms, or if they have any kind of cough or illness going on that's maybe not even COVID related. We're certainly suggesting masks be worn at this point in time, but not quite mandated yet.
It used to be kind of a running joke or humorous if somebody coughed. I got to tell you, right now I look around.
Yeah.
I go, how close are they? Where am I? In an indoor setting.
Or when you cough, everybody's looking at you.
Yeah,
You just want to scream, just a cough. I'm
just a little dry.
Yeah, but really, who knows? And it's a great point. And we've really, our Police and Fire Commission ultimately, has a big say in our mandated of masks. But we've been on the same page, myself and the PFC and the fire department as well. The first time that went around, I'm a big believer in consistency, and we've typically followed suit on what the city does as far as their departments and their mask mandates. So it could come. We're watching it closely. We've dialed back some tours. We've allowed some ride-alongs to start up again, trying to get back to as normal as we can. But those things are fluid and subject to change depending on what happens.
Talk about that for just a moment, the ride-along program.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's been consistent, but I don't know everybody knows what it is and what it entails.
Yeah, the ride-along program is just something we offer to the community. If anybody wants to come in and see what we do and go out with an officer for a couple hours, we'll just have you come in and sign a waiver. If you're under 18, you just have to have a waiver from your parents. We've taken a lot of ride-alongs through a program at the high school with their criminal justice class, so we get a lot of kids in that way. But anybody interested in that, by all means, just reach out to the police department, and anybody that you talk to can steer you in the right direction, and we'll set up a time, and you can come out for a couple hours and see what it looks like on the other side of those lights rather than having them in your rearview mirror.
Yeah, to find out what it is you do,
Sure.
and how the interaction goes.
Yep.
Maybe be a little more, I don't want to say sympathetic, but empathetic maybe.
A little more understanding, I would say, and it's a different environment, and when you see it from that side, unfortunately for most police officers like myself, it becomes normal. It's as normal as you doing your job.
Right.
But for someone to come in and see those types of things, from the other side of it, there's a lot of value there.
Talking with Pat Zepps, Travis Esser here from Marshfield PD. You can too. 384-2192 is our number here. 384-2192 on the Insight program.
Racing returns to Marshfield Motor Speedway this Saturday with the Jim Langrick Memorial. Super late models, the Upper Midwest Vintage Series, Extreme 4s, Bandits, and Skidders will all be competing. Admission is just $12 for fans 15 and older. Students 9 to 14, $8, and kids 8 and under are free. Fan gates open at 5 p.m., qualifying at 6 p.m., and racing set for 7. That's the Jim Langrick Memorial and Retro Night under the lights this Saturday at Marshfield Motor Speedway. Be there. Country Wireless Unlimited High-Speed Internet. We bring the Internet to you. Always growing and expanding our coverage with new high-speed in select areas. There are non-contract options available, as well as free installation with a 2-year contract. Rural, residential, and business services are available, and many plans to choose from. Call our office for details today. 715-389-8584. Visit them online at countrywireless.com and like them on Facebook.
WDLB's Insight program here on the second Friday of the month. You know that if you are listening to us live here on AM 1450 or FM 98.7 WDLB, but you may be watching us on Marshfield Media Access at any time in the future here. They have a Facebook page. They show these videos in a rotation on channel 989 on your Charter Digital tier, and on their homepage as well, Marshfield Media Access, as a part of their mission here with the city and the communications department. So we invite you to take a look at those, but if you are wondering why I keep saying that, it's because not everybody here is listening to us live on the radio at this time, kind of setting the scene. And I always say when we do these programs that some of the things we talk about may have already resolved themselves. Now, we've been pretty general here, but you may be watching us after school has started, and we talked about school starting and things like that. But that's why I keep mentioning the date, because at the time that this conversation happened, the things that have happened already, you probably are already in access to. The news today had a story about the retirement of one of your canine officers. Mm-hmm. And that story was picked up and got some attention. Tell me about what's happening.
Yeah, there not much to really say on that. I mean, dogs, they have a certain duration that they work, and the decision was made between the handler and myself and the canine program coordinator that it was best for Steffi to retire, and she did an amazing job for us. I think it was just over 5 years that she was on the road. She got some awards for tracking. She was instrumental in tracking the individual, the homicide suspect that came out of Marathon County. Just did a great job for us. So she'll live out the remainder of her days with her handler and adapt to a more peaceful lifestyle. So,
well, two things. One, as a officer who gets a dog, now that dog is his.
Yes.
Is it turning it belongs to him now? Are they turning the papers over, so to speak? It's his to do the vet care, and it's now your animal, right?
Correct. Yeah, they take on the responsibility of the animal.
And you know that going in. So now you have to find a different officer to take up another new canine officer?
Yeah, we would open up the process because we'd like to get back to having 2 canines. So we'll take interest from any officer, and we'll go through a process depending on how many applicants we have, make the best choice, and then they go through a rather rigorous, I believe it's 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, it's 6.
6 weeks at a kennel where it's kind of an interesting process. They go down there and they select the dog and bond with it a little bit. That's how they pick which dog they're going to use, and then they go through the remainder of the 6 weeks training with it. So it's a big commitment, and it's a lot. So an officer needs to know that going into it, that you're going to have a partner here for the next 5 to 8 years. So
well, just like a human, though, you have an inkling when this is going to happen, and you must be kind of having feelers out amongst the officers and saying who would like to do this, or have an idea of somebody who would be willing to take on a dog from now till they expire, in this life. So you must have an idea of where you're going to go with this. And even before you retired the dog, do you now have somebody who's willing to step right up?
Sure, we'll have interested applicants. And you bring up an interesting point, because one of the things that I think our lieutenants do that's an excellent job is seeking interest in preparing people for the future, succession planning, if nothing else. If someone's interested in leadership, what can we do to steer them there, even though there's no spots available? Canine, SWAT, instructing. We really push people into those directions so that when the time comes, people have thought about, do you want to do this? Are you prepared to take on the challenges? And canine is just another one of those. In some respects, it's a much bigger commitment, because you have a partner that you're taking home and are responsible for, and it's a fairly serious, it's a big responsibility. So, but yes, we do have interested officers.
And now how does the process start to acquire it? This is a program that's not just taxpayer funded.
Correct. It's based off a lot of donations is where we seek most of our canine funding. And the community's been outstanding, because it is one of the pricier things that we go through. The initial cost of the dog, the cost of the training, cost of the maintenance, even simple things like providing an officer with a kennel, to house the dog, or if an officer goes on vacation, where does the dog go? So, there's some expense to it, but the community has been gracious with donations, and we've got enough in our fund to seek the replacement.
That was the next question, is that you had an idea. I mean, how do you determine it was her turn to retire? Her sniffer wasn't working as good anymore, or her legs
I think
ache,
it's hard to point to any one thing, and what I do is I rely on the handler to really communicate that, it's time. And I think in the simplest respect, she had done it for 5 years, and it was time.
I think what maybe some people don't realize that we could share is that we often don't get these dogs until they're 3 years old or so. So I mean, we're not getting them, as puppies. They have 3 years of pretty rigorous training under their belts already by the time that they get joined with one of our handlers. And then, for a dog of that type, by the time they're 8 or 9 years old, living in that environment, they've had pretty much the run of their career, and so it's pretty normal for us to only get that 5 or 6 years out of
that was my next question. Is that average? I mean, I don't know how long, and again, the breed is probably German Shepherd. I've seen that the most often, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
That's probably 12, maybe 13-year lifespan?
Yeah, but I mean, working-wise, I don't know that we've had any that have gone over. I think most of them
7?
have about, they're usually 8-9 years old, I think we get, and then they end up being retired. So again, we're only getting that 5 or 6 years, and we've had a couple different breeds. We haven't had any German Shepherds yet. We've primarily had Belgian Malinois, they're called, which is similar looking to a German Shepherd.
That's
and then
what I thought it was.
We've also had a couple Dutch Shepherds too over time. So, but the officers go and unite with those dogs down in Indiana for that 6 to 8 week training period. So it's like Pat said, it's a pretty big investment for us and for the dog and the handler.
So you're financially prepared to replace this dog, though?
We are.
Yep.
But it will need, again, upkeep and...
Yes.
And you'll still do programs, I don't know, car washes, broad sales, or you'll have organizations that'll say this is proceeds going to the canine unit.
Yeah, we're going to have a booth down at the fair. We're selling some T-shirts now through the police department that fund our canine program. We've over the holidays, you may have seen little stuffed canines with little tags on. So those are always good. And the nice part about that is that if you want to make a donation to the Canine Fund, you're getting something for it, whether it's a T-shirt or the dog. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial thing. But we're prepared to replace it. I don't have a time frame for when that'll happen because we've still got to select the officer, and we've got to get a training scheduled, which it's no easy task for a lot of people because you're going away from your house for 6 weeks, and so it takes a bit of planning.
Now, I forget, with your department, are you each with an assigned vehicle and you stay with that, or do you change vehicles? Because there's a cage in the back that needs to stay with somebody.
Yeah, the only vehicles that are assigned are the canines. That stays with that officer and that dog. So we have 2 of those.
So now when that dog retires, will that vehicle go with the next officer then?
It will. Yep, that vehicle's currently parked and we'll be ready to go for the next one.
Okay. So that part of it is taken care of.
Yep.
There's always 2 vehicles that are canine ready.
Correct.
And that stays with the provided handler at that time.
That does. That stays right at their house because that's how that dog is transported to and from work and anywhere else that it needs to go.
Okay. So that's how that's going to happen. And again, you just said you don't have a timeline yet necessarily for everything on how it's going to happen, but there proves there was some forethought anyway into when the dog was going to retire and what we were going to do at that time.
Yeah, definitely. And the same forethought will go into our the one that we have left, Rika. We'll look down the road and we rely a lot on what the handler tells us. And I mean, they're really ultimately the experts in the dog. They know the dog. They know how it's supposed to perform. So, but Travis is right. That 5-6 years is pretty typical.
Talking with Pat Zepps, Travis Esser here, Marshfield PD. We're going to take one last step away here, and we'll be back with opportunity for you to visit with them as well here on AM 1450, FM 98.7 WDLB.
Shirley's House of Hope is a Christian domestic violence shelter in Marshfield, solely supported by generous, caring, and compassionate people in this community. We provide a safe, healing environment where women and children can receive short-term emergency lodging or participate in a 6-month healing program. Our goal is to see lives changed by the transforming love of Jesus. If you would like to know more about Shirley's House of Hope, to volunteer or donate, please visit us on the web at shirleyshouseofhope.org or call Sue at 715-486-9000.
It's not a sunny place for sunny people, nor is it a shady place for shady people. In a classic Lutheran Hour message, Dr. Oswald Hoffman says the life of St. Mary Magdalene illustrates how the grace of God makes the Christian church a sunny place for shady people, a place for people like you and me. Archives August continues this week on The Lutheran Hour.
Sunday morning at 8 a.m. right here on AM 1450, FM 98.7 WDLB.
AM 1450, FM 98.7, WDLB's Inside program here this second Friday in August, coming to you live on the radio, in rebroadcast or rewatch on video through Marshfield Media Access, Channel 989. Or it could be from, linked from their Facebook page to their YouTube channel. You can see us and what we look like here in the studio several ways, as a matter of fact, through the city communications channels, as we're talking with Marshfield PD here this morning. And Friday the 13th, I'd forgotten about that. No hockey masks today? Or
No, we said we don't need anybody running around with that stuff tonight. So
no chainsaws.
Everybody behave. Yeah, none of that stuff.
You ever watch what the moon phases are?
Boy, I probably have at some point. I've seen all the some of the Friday the 13th. But moon phases, it's always said that it gets busier on a full moon, and maybe it does.
I don't know. It seems like sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not. So
yeah, it's probably like any other goofy night, depending upon how the weather is and what people are doing and what's going on around your community.
Sure.
Whether people want to be out. Well, we'll see you out at the fair and at events around town. Hopefully, I'll be with you that way.
Sounds great.
You don't have to come up to the car. I'll come up to you.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
All right. Travis Esser, Pat Zeps, my guests here this morning on today's Insight program on WDLB. We're talking with members of Marshfield PD. Next week, let's see, we do have 4 Fridays in the month. We'll talk with County Board Chairman Lance Plimmel. And then on the 4th Friday, we'll be out at the Central Wisconsin State Fair and talk with Sheriff Sean Becker out there. Invited to stop by and say hello to us as we broadcast from the fair that week. And I have a special broadcast location, which I will tell you about when we get there. And I believe there's going to be, well, I shouldn't say that yet. I was going to say vaccine shots available out at the fair from our booth as well.